Okay, all right. Get started here. I have a feeling we're going to need all of the time. Every minute is going to count tonight. So, oh, that's still highlighted the wrong one. This is the last one. Today's April 2nd. So we are in the last class here for the quarter, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to kind of reflect and think about a few things that maybe we can take away from this quarter as things we can go and work on and be mindful of, right? So just looking for, as we go through class, you can kind of maybe be thinking about things that are largely applicable across most of this list here, right? When we're wanting to teach, when we're wanting to prepare, when we're wanting to protect our kids in the context of culture, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to kind of go through that at the end. Okay, so just our general kind of guiding principles that we used the last couple weeks in regards to the digital age. So we've talked about these a couple times now, so I'll go through them rather quickly. There's characteristics and behaviors that we are expected to and commanded to demonstrate and to display. And so that's applicable across the entirety of our lives, which would include any digital interactions that we have. Our name and our reputation is important, and these days it's very easy to have that tarnished or ruined in a bad moment that's either caught on the camera that everybody carries around in their pocket, or in something that we say or post online. Sometimes extreme measures, and I'll let you define kind of what extreme is, but I would just say when Jesus talks about putting your own eye out, that's about as extreme as you can get, right? But sometimes extreme measures are not only good, but required and necessary. Every deed and all of our speech is going to be not only judged, but important to remind ourselves and to certainly impress upon our kids that there's no anonymity from God. So regardless of what it seems like you can say or do on your device, God knows and sees all of those things, whether anyone else does or not. Okay, so kind of our 4 categories that we've been working through. So we've made our way through time and just the inordinate amount of time that we're all spending on our devices these days. 2+ hours a day for the average social media user, and then for teenagers, device use across all categories of over 7 hours. That's the average. Again, that's crazy that half teenagers are spending more than 7 hours a day on their phone. It's kind of nuts. We talked a little bit about attention and the challenge that we have these days, just kind of being still and not doing anything. Just the other day in the grocery store, standing in line, and every single person in line staring down at their phone, right? So we're not spending as much time thinking about things, and certainly there's some concern around biblical things that we need to think about and should spend time meditating and thinking on. From an attitude standpoint, we talked about just in the digital world where our focus can be led and placed, and sometimes, especially when it comes to social media, that can lead to anxiety or fear of missing out, like we talked about last week, or negative comparisons, comparing our situation with someone else's whose seems better, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight. And those generally aren't going to be helpful from a spiritual standpoint, and aren't going to lead us to laying up treasure in heaven. So we'll continue down content tonight, and then talk about some of the ways that we can be persuaded in various different ways. But we had a little bit of discussion at the end of class last week about how things we can do to help our kids identify, what's good or what's bad, what's helpful, what's not helpful, beneficial uses versus non-beneficial, etc. And that we're really often seeing very different things, right? What they see and interact with is very different than what I see and interact with. And that adds an added degree of difficulty, if you will, when we're trying to help our kids find things and use social media and just technology in general in a way that aligns with God's Word. Okay. That was the laser, not the... Okay, there we go. All right, so first question for tonight. And this is kind of humorous, but also kind of not. So I don't know if you remember back in 2022, Dr. Phil had a 17-year-old kid on his show who didn't talk to his family anymore. And his justification for not talking to his family anymore was, they don't have enough followers. Like, they're not going to help me in what I'm trying to do in growing my online brand or, marketing myself or whatever. And so that's obviously kind of an extreme case. But the question that I want to discuss is what dangers are out there, right? There's obviously a big cultural push for us and especially our kids to put, ourselves and a lot of our lives online kind of for everybody to see. And so what are, kind of some of the dangers of that? And what kind of things do you think we should be thinking about? Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 18, this is a pretty famous one that just about everybody has heard before. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall, right? So be careful of the idea of promoting ourselves and, hey, it's all about me, and I'm important, and I want everyone to see what I'm doing. So with that being said, what dangers do you think are out there for our kids from a self-promotion standpoint? Does anything ever go away in this modern age, right? Nothing ever goes away, right? So I think back at things I did when I was 14, 15, 16 years old, and I'm like, man, I'm really glad that there weren't cell phones and there weren't people able to take pictures of some of the stupid things that I did, and I didn't have the ability to post my own pictures of the stupid things that I did for everyone else to see, right? So just from a general standpoint, our kids, everything that they put out there, we've seen, a couple instances over the past couple years where, people who were either seeking political office or some other, sort of high-profile position have kind of been things that they did and put online, decades ago, in some cases, caused problems and came back to get them. From a spiritual standpoint, it can work the same way, right? So we get older, we have kids, and there's stuff that we're not necessarily proud of that's on in social media for everyone to see. How do we explain that to our kids when we're trying to influence people in a godly way? And we've got our past out there for people to see. Sometimes that's difficult and becomes a roadblock in that conversation. Stephen?
Anything you put out there on social media is public. You're inviting public ridicule, possibly, but also you're inviting someone to motivate you to do something that would excite them or make them laugh, or things that would be ungodly for you to do, but you're tempted to do them because you're trying to be accepted, especially as a child. You're trying to find acceptance among your peers, and so it could really motivate you to do things that aren't good.
Yeah, so there's definitely, when kids are young, they're very much influenced by their family and wanting their family to approve of them, and then there's an age at which that kind of transitions over to their friends being much more of the driving influence, right? And so you see the internet, and now you're opening up not just a relatively small friend group, but you've got this billions of people friend group that now can influence you to do different things as well. JD?
Back to the previous point, the whole comparing yourself to others thing, and perhaps that can also lead you into a downward spiral of anxiety of, like, doing more to be like those people or to be better, and then giving more and more until there's nothing left to give. So again, the whole, they're so much better than me, I wish I could be like them, or I wish I could surpass them, I'm willing to give anything to do that, would certainly seem to be one of, if not the biggest danger of putting everything out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's, comparison is the thief of joy, right? that thing I think came up a couple weeks ago, and it's very true. And regardless of what age you are, I think it holds very much true. Comparing yourself to others can get can start to be problematic. I think of kind of thinking about some of these topics. I kept coming back to Jesus and one of his condemnations of the Pharisees, of them wanting to be seen by others, right? They were doing all of these things to garner attention to themselves. And I think about, why am I posting this picture of my dinner tonight, right? So, that's relatively harmless, right? That's not a huge deal. But there could be several explanations for that. Maybe it was, the presentation is just very unique, and I thought it was really neat, and I wanted to share it with other people. So there's certainly ways that it can be okay, but I think it's also worthy of consideration on, hey, maybe I go to a fancy restaurant for maybe an anniversary or a birthday or something special, and am I posting it to celebrate the occasion, or am I posting it to, hey, look at me, I went and got the fancy restaurant, and here's my $250 meal for everybody to see and think how great I am, right? So not necessarily bad in and of itself, just like a lot of things, our motivation behind it is kind of what can either make it be okay or get us into trouble. So going down to the next question. So how can we demonstrate to our kids and get across the folly of seeking approval of people? And that could be online, that can be in person, right? So peer pressure and influence is a thing. Those things a lot of kids deal with. Last week I talked a little bit about having to be comfortable with the idea of being the only one. Sometimes, you're going to be the only one every once in a while. So how do we pass that along to our kids? How do we get our kids to find the real value in God's love? I have Galatians chapter 1 and verse 10 listed there, right? And so Paul's talking to them about false doctrine. He starts earlier, I think verse 6, talking about false doctrines, and then he kind of references his own journey and says, like, I was the Jews' Jew. I was, very prominent in that world, and I left. And if I wanted to please people, I wouldn't have left, right? I'd still be doing those kinds of things if my motivation was really to get approval from people. And obviously I didn't, and I'm following Christ because that's the right thing to do. That's where the value is. So how do we do that? How do we demonstrate that folly to our kids?
Well, I think we have to help them to understand there's a lot of traps. Number one, people's opinions will change. The standard will often change. I think continuing to instill in them how God sees us, where our value and worth is really ultimately going to be found, and why it's always going to be more important to please sinners. So I think as parents, it has to be demonstrated with the mom and dad how we live and how we view the scriptures. And I think that will also place a heavy emphasis upon, if that's really the case, then we're more interested in the thoughts of God. What does God have to say? What has He revealed in His Word than we are with what is everybody
Yeah, so I remember we had at least 2 kids that at some point, I think around age 7 or so, when you start asking, hey, so what do you think you want to be when you grow up? We had at least 2 that said YouTuber. I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up. That's what I want to be. And so you kind of like, okay, why do you want to be that? Well, because everyone likes you. And so, okay, that's the perception, right, that a 7-year-old kid has, is that, oh, this person on YouTube, I'm watching because I like what they're doing. So everyone must like what they're doing. So obviously that is not the case, right? Kyle?
Well, there at the end of verse 10 in Galatians 1, he says, if I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Those two things sort of stand in they do stand in contrast to each other. If I really want to model for my children the folly of seeking approval of men, I do that by really engaging in service. And you made me think about that a little bit in your example of taking a picture of a fancy dinner or whatever. If I'm doing that, or considering doing that, or my child's considering doing that, and we're talking about, well, what influence will it have on other people? Would it maybe stir up the temptation of covetousness or envy or things like that? Or those things we're thinking about considering as we're doing these activities? It's really a demonstration that we're trying to subject ourselves to the will of Christ in all things.
Yeah, so, I think about everything that we put out there. I think in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, right? Satan's going around like a roaring lion. He is looking for opportunity. And the more that we have out there, the more opportunity he has to either, use that in a way that maybe we didn't intend, or for some nefarious purpose. I'll give a kind of humorous example, but I think it makes the point. So a certain college baseball team that I occasionally go and watch their games, when the opposing players come up to bat, what will happen is the students will go on Instagram and find the guy who's batting. They'll find his girlfriend and what her name is, and they'll start chanting his girlfriend's name while he's up there trying to hit as a way to distract them, right? So that's kind of funny and fairly innocent, but so sort of take that same idea and think about what could happen that isn't so innocent and that isn't so funny with all the stuff that we put out there, especially with our kids, right? And the information that they make available and the things that they put out there about themselves and how that can be used for nefarious purposes. And something that's completely innocent, can get taken out. Even things that, kids just take as normal, and they go and they put these things online, and now they start getting made fun of for these things, and so they start to question themselves. Okay, maybe that's not normal, right? And it is. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Maybe I shouldn't think that way. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I need to think about things a little bit differently. And a lot of times we can. Ryan had a whole lesson about bullying, but a lot of times that can lead to bullying. Unfortunately, I came across a story like an hour before class last week of a 10-year-old girl who committed suicide because she could not get away from her friends added her to a text group where the whole purpose of the text group was to make fun of her. And so they just, it was relentless, right? So bullying in the old days, you went to school or wherever and you got bullied and then you went home and you had this kind of reprieve and this break from that. That doesn't happen anymore, right? 24/7, somebody's coming at you digitally. There's no way for you to kind of retreat and get away from that. And so, she did talk to her parents, and the parents talked to some other kids in that text group, and it apparently wasn't enough. And it's just really, really sad, but that's, I think, very true. A couple weeks ago I said, hey, especially if your kid's under 16 and there's no restrictions on it's like handing them a loaded gun. And that's one of the reasons why. It may not be from anything that they do, just other people and the influence that they have. And kind of certain behaviors or things that they pick out and start to jump on. Chris?
What came to mind for me was James 4:4, which says, "Do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God?" If our motivation is to get approval of people of the world, we're missing the boat, because in order to do that, you've got to compromise godly values, right? To get buy-in from a large group of people. That's the wisdom in James, is saying don't go down that path because it's not a godly one.
Yeah. Yep. And then the other, one of the other pitfalls with this specifically that I've mentioned, I think, a couple times this quarter is just chasing likes, right? In whatever your platform of choice is. The incentive structure is such that you can end up in that pursuit of likes doing things that you wouldn't ordinarily do otherwise. I think I've mentioned a couple times. You take exactly the same people talking about exactly the same subject in exactly the same way, one of them, and they do it once modestly dressed, they do it once, we'll just call it immodestly dressed, and immodestly dressed is like 3-5 times as many likes, views, clicks, all of that, right? So that's where the incentive structure is set up. You?
There's a fine line in rearing our children between teaching humility and an appropriate self-value. The parable in Luke 14 of the wedding feast, when Jesus is warned that if you go into a wedding feast, don't automatically go to the seat of honor, the distinguished area, because someone may come in that's a little more distinguished than you, and there'll be some embarrassment there.
Yeah, and you're told to get out of the way. Yeah.
It's better to go in an humble fashion and then be moved up. But that's not your decision.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of wanting the likes and the clicks and the followers is almost creating this false sense of self-worth. And that's not what our value is supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. At some point, just like most things that bring us joy, at some point it's going to go away, most likely, right? So everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame, so to speak. Well, what happens at the end of that, right? If I've spent all this time and effort, and that's been my motivation, and my focus is getting all the likes and clicks, and at some point that's going to go away. So then what? Well, then what am I left with, right? When I don't have the likes and clicks anymore, now I'm kind of stuck. Crystal?
And I think that's a good time to probably build in the conversation of sin being a passing pleasure, and that it can dull God to us, because it's beautiful. It's people liking you, and it's just so surreal, and it's what's the big deal, and all of that. And it would be just a good time as parents that we remind kids that yes, it does look good, yes, but there's warnings to that, and be very intentional to show them that I'm not trying to say that this is, you're not lured by this. We are.
Yeah. Yep.
But we have to ask the question of what is really the point in you trying to seek favor so much from all these people that some of them you don't even know. So.
Yeah. No, it can get folks off track really quickly, for sure. Any other comments on that, Braden?
Something that comes to my mind with this is we think about why people post their lives and things like that online. The comments were made about how sometimes that leads to almost more progressively sinful behavior being, put out there. And I think, this demonstration, this kind of, seeking approval of people versus finding value in God's love. I think there's a sense where, like, we as a church family can have an impact on that too. I've noticed situations where people have, gone the path where they're engaged in sinful behavior and they start posting it online. and members of the church, maybe not here, but you know, they're members of the church, see that, and some interact with those posts, you know, positively, and some don't. You know, but I think we have an opportunity too, when we see those types of things, to, as a church family, you know, help, you know, whether it's calling attention to the kids' parents, or if appropriate, going directly to the person posting those things, and just kind of that, you know, communal village, you know, mindset. We're all here to help each other get to heaven, and you know, online can be such a dangerous place, and I just think we have to be also careful about how we engage with people's posts, because we can kind of, I think, passively condone what they're doing if we're not careful too.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I would kind of also offer the other side of the coin, and sometimes we're very quick to judge people based off of things, and maybe when we go and talk to them, we don't understand maybe the complete story, and maybe there's an explanation, maybe there's not, right? But I do think it's important that we have, just like in any situation where there is a concern or a question, we go and we talk to people, right? And that's really how we kind of get to the bottom and solve those situations, is going and having the conversation about it, right? Anybody else? Okay. All right, so we'll kind of move on to a little bit of persuasion. And so so the first question here, so how much of social media is real life, right? So if you had to put a percentage on it, and you had to say it's, you know, 25% real, it's 50% real, it's 80% real, what percentage? Somebody throw out a number on what you would put it at.
10%.
10% real? Okay. Anybody got a JD?
5%.
Okay. I don't know what the answer is. I don't have a number. But I do think it is more often, certainly less than 50%, right, to be conservative. Less than 50% is real. So I'll give you an example. So one of the places that I go quite a bit for work, they had Dude Perfect come and shoot a video there. So if you're under age 50, you probably know who that is. If you're not, you may not. But they got famous for shooting a basketball off the highest part of a stadium and like making it through the hoop. That's kind of how they get started. And they do all these trick shots. So they showed up, and you know, the episode that they put on YouTube is, I don't know, 20 minutes long, 30 minutes long, and it's like them doing all of this different stuff. And so you think, okay, so that they must have been here like this whole time and filmed all of this stuff. Well, there was a camera crew there shooting B-roll for like 8 hours, and then like the talent came in, and they were there for literally like 15 minutes and did all of their shots, and then were out the door, right? So just the way that it's presented is completely different from what actually happened and the way it was filmed. And when you're standing there in person, that's the only way that you would know it. Otherwise, you have this completely inaccurate perception of what happened, right? So all that's to say, it's not real the majority of the time, right? And it's important that our kids get that across, right? So I gave the story of, you know, I want to be a YouTuber because everyone likes me, right? Okay, that's not real. That's the way that it may be presented. That's maybe what you think, but it's not really. It's not real, right? So I've got John chapter 8 up there. Okay, so abide in my word, and you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth is what will set you free. So we had a whole lesson kind of about truth earlier in the quarter, but he keeps going there, right, and talks about no longer practicing sin, right? So you've got this idea of here is truth, and what truth is, and it's Jesus, and it's God's word, and then closely associated with that is leaving and fleeing this sinful behavior, okay? So that kind of leads to the next question that we have up there. How can we do that? How can we, if we know Jesus is truth, and that's how we will be freed, how do we break away? How do we teach our kids to break away from the stuff that is false or misleading, right? And so what I mean by that is worldly views about sin, interactions with parents, superficial focus on just consumerism and buying things, and that's what really matters and important. Just this idea of humanism, that if we learn enough, we can eventually, I don't say necessarily ascend, but right, that's what it's about, learning and elevating ourselves. How do people who chase happiness, all of these different things, right? And a lot of that is portrayed as normal, right? So especially lately, so we're at least 10 years into gay marriage being legal in the United States, so it very much it's presented as, hey, that's normal, that's been around for a long time, that's okay. It hasn't been around for a long time. It's been around for 10 years out of several thousands and thousands of years where that wasn't the case, right? So how do we do that? How do we help our kids identify those kinds of things? So false or misleading information. How do we balance, maybe here's a better question, or one that I have anyway, is how do we balance protection versus, and so kind of fencing them off and keeping them completely away from it versus, I don't want to say exposing them to it because that's not the right word, but like a vaccine where there's a small dose and you're there to help and guide and to help them maneuver that, right? So how do we balance some of that? Kyle?
Well, you referenced there John chapter 8. If we don't know the truth, that's an issue. And just in this personal experience, but at least in scenarios I can think of in my life where I've had opportunities to teach maybe Bible classes or whatever, been around various children. It seems like the children who would tell you, oh yeah, mom and dad read the Bible and we talk about it a lot at home versus families where that may not be going on. You can tell a difference in the children and the way they respond to what other people are saying to them or about them or information, I would guess, that they may hear on the internet, and it's, I think, in large part because there's a foundation of truth that some children have the opportunity to grow up with, and there's others that maybe not so much, and it's really God's truth that guides us in how we perceive information that we're receiving from the outside world.
Yeah, so that's a big part of it, right? We've got to make sure that they know, and that we're not just that they know, but also that we're demonstrating that ourselves, right? And we're kind of setting an example for them. But anybody have thoughts on just kind of again that balance between completely protecting our kids from everything versus kind of more of a vaccine approach, Stu?
Not exactly like that, but this may be oversimplifying it, but I would say the first part is actually knowing what your children are looking at.
Yeah, yep, for sure.
So monitoring, being aware of, and then having those discussions when you see something that says, I should probably ask them about this. And it should serve as opportunities to have those discussions, but you won't have any of those discussions if you don't know what they're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, so the reason I asked that is so I've got a couple examples in my mind of different people that I grew up with, and there's one family in particular who was very protective of their kids. Like, in the course of my life, probably the most protective of their kids is anyone that I've known. And the instant that their kids left the house, fell away. And I think in large part it was because they had been sort of, fenced off from a lot of influence, which, certainly as parents we want to do to some extent. But it was to the point where once they got out of the protection of their parents, they were just completely overwhelmed by all these things that they'd never been exposed to and never experienced, and they like immediately had no way to deal with that, and it caused problems, right?
With that in mind, I see as an inability to make a decision, a critical decision about whatever circumstances. So have they ever had the opportunity to make a decision and maybe it not go as well as they would?
Right.
And how do you balance that as a parent to say, hey, it's okay in certain situations to fail?
Yep.
Have that discussion. But there are some times when you just pull them out of the street.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. Stacy?
I think we're kind of inundated with all kinds of teaching opportunities in society because there's so much godly behavior or ungodly behavior that's just everywhere. And I think like one example that came to my mind, we were staying at a hotel one weekend and they happened to be hosting all the participants of the softball game World Series. And so, I mean, there were banners and, you know, just people all over the place, you know, we couldn't get away from it. And, you know, so we use that as a teaching opportunity, but I think what's important is, you know, obviously you want it to be age appropriate, but explaining things to them so that when they do see it and you're not there, they understand what's going on, and you're kind of there in the initial time to help them process through and answer questions, and they're not just going to sources that may not be good sources of truth.
Yep. Tim?
I think the same, like you're just controlling the when, where, and how they're exposed to this information over the course of years.
Yeah.
If they get too much at a certain age, it doesn't work, it's too much, they're not ready for it. You know, so you just have to control the when, where, and how they get it. They're still getting it, but you can control it so you can talk about it.
Yep. Ben?
Maybe an example to share with our children, and what you just mentioned about, you know, protecting our kids too much. I think about Joseph in the Old Testament. You know, he seemed to be the favorite. You know, he's got his coat, and then he's exposed to all of this. So young people can still make the right decision. You know, he's still thinking about God while he's in Egypt, and in those challenging situations any young person is going to have. So I think, you know, something was done along the way. He's learned about God, he's heard about God, he's worshiping God, and, you know, so I think that gives us hope as well that we should take good measures with our children and help them with this decision making. And, you know, I remember a family at another congregation, and the dad was like, well, I think my son has had enough experiences and has been exposed to enough. And that was just a grease fire. It's like, what are you doing? Like, this doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
It didn't work. So I think Joseph is a great example that, yeah, children are going to have to learn, you know, but I think talking to them, sharing our sinful conduct when we were younger, when no one saw it on Facebook, because there was no Facebook, helping them to see, this is what happened when I did this, this is what happened when we did this, can help them to learn, yeah, there's a better way to live, there's a better way to make decisions like that.
Yeah. Do we have I see a hand over here somewhere. Yes, ma'am.
I was brought up extremely strict. Didn't know anything about the world or anything. When it came time for me to leave home, my mom took me aside and she said, I have protected you. You have been under my roof and I have protected you from all kinds of wrong. Now you're going to be on your own, and everything that you do wrong will fall on your shoulders, good or bad, is going to fall on your shoulders and on your shoulders alone.
Yeah.
And that alone, when I left, no way it's going to be my, you know.
Right. Yeah. That motivated you. It sounds like you know, kind of encouraged and lifted you up. So, yeah, that's good. All right, so we're going to skip this one, just a couple of thoughts, and we're going to go. We got 4 minutes left here, so we'll go into kind of review. So, just from implementation standpoint, and we've talked about a couple of things here already tonight that I had written down as sort of my key takeaways from this. So, when you look at that list, what kind of things apply that we can say, okay, here's a close to universal principle that I've picked up this quarter. So, for instance, Stu mentioned, as a parent, you've got to, in order to have conversations about what your kids are doing and seeing online, you've got to know what they're doing and seeing online. And so, as parents, there's a lot of effort that goes into that, right? So I look at a bunch of these topics, and I'm like, man, there's a lot of effort that goes into parenting. You go all the way down the list. I've got to know my kids and what they're dealing with to try and help them maintain a tender heart. I've got to know what they're doing and who they're dating and how they're dressing, right? And what they're worried about in the world. You can kind of go down the whole list, and that parents got to. It's a contact sport, right? It's not one that you can kind of be an innocent bystander. You got to be in the middle of what's going on. So what else? What other kinds of things can you look at on this list and say, hey, this is something I think that applies very broadly here? Chris?
I think one thing, kind of overarching umbrella, that I wasn't perfect at as a parent, I wish I could have a few do-overs, is being a better listener to your kids, not overreacting to the question. Because usually the question is an honest question, right? So if you listen and give a loving, honest, biblical response, they're way more likely to come back down the road and circle back to you when they run into other issues. I think old school parenting, maybe our parents and before, if you ask them a question about sin or something like that, you're like, well, why are you asking me that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But that just shuts them down. And I made a few mistakes along those lines, but just listening to your kids and letting them finish and taking it from there, I think that's important.
Yeah, so I had written down, you got to have a great relationship, right? Which I think is what you're speaking to, and so that involves listening when you want to talk, and sometimes that's really hard, right? Ben, did you have your hand up back there? No? Okay. All right. So a couple others, right? One of the big ones is we've got to set the example, right? As parents, as people in the congregation, as grandparents, aunts, uncles, all those things. Who are trying to help our kids. We've got to set the example, and there's certainly things I've kind of thought about here throughout the quarter. I'm like, man, I need to do a better job with that. And then, like it's also been mentioned tonight, it's really important that we are talking about and referencing God's Word as often as possible, right? And we've got a Christian worldview on how we look at things and how we interact with people and how we handle situations, and that we're demonstrating that to our kids, and we're having conversations and talking to them about our decision-making process and how we're using God's Word to guide us in the decisions that we make. So it's 8 o'clock, so I appreciate everybody's thoughts and comments for the quarter, and we'll see you next week.